Why is Iran refusing to come to the negotiating table? Why won't they negotiate? We're going to crack that problem in this video. But we're going to do a little more than that. We're going to go through a number of news items, quote unquote news items. They're not news items. They're propaganda pieces, they're press releases, call them what you will. We're going to go through Iranian state media, all from today, to see what they're saying about the negotiations. And we're going to read between the lines, as we always do when we look at Iranian state media, and we're going to figure out what is going on. What are the Iranians thinking right now? And at the end of this video, at the end of the explanation, I will explain, in my opinion, why they cannot come to the negotiating table and why I believe they won't. I could turn out to be wrong and I'll have egg on my face. That's fine. But I'm going to lay out my case in this video. So let's get right to it right now. So this is, first of all, the front page of WANA Today, the Iranian state media outlet. And it says, Iran's 3 red lines: retaliation, compensation, and a new Hormuz doctrine. Now, I'm going to show you these news items in chronological order of when they were released, and you'll see how similar most of them are. And most of these are fairly short. The first one is a little bit longer. Let's go through it. Here we go. So this is from today, April 21st. We will certainly not let the criminal aggressors grow unpunished. This is part of the message delivered on April 9th, so that's a while ago, by Ayatollah Sayed Mojtaba Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader. In it, 3 firm positions of the Islamic Republic regarding its adversaries were laid out. So they're going back, so they're saying that the supreme leader, who no one has laid eyes on ever since he was appointed, he hasn't come out in public. There's all kinds of rumors about whether or not he's even, well, it's believed that he's alive but injured, but we haven't seen him. So they're saying that there are 3 firm positions of the Islamic Republic. And let's just jump down to it. Number 1, we will not let the aggressor go. Okay, because remember, he said, we will not let the criminal aggressors go unpunished. So we will not let them go. The first message is unambiguous. We will certainly not let the criminal aggressors go unpunished. This means Iran does not consider the February 28th war imposed by the United States and Israel a closed file. Even if the ceasefire holds, from Tehran's perspective, the conflict is far from over. The statement functions as a warning. The response may be delayed, but it will not be removed from the agenda. Number 2, we will demand full compensation. The second message is about accountability. We will certainly demand compensation for every single damage and the blood money of the martyrs. This is not only about financial restitution. Iran is signaling that war must carry costs, political, legal, and financial. In other words, even if active fighting stops, the issue will continue in courts, negotiations, and international pressure mechanisms. And 3, a new phase for the Strait of Hormuz. Perhaps the most significant statement is this: we will certainly bring the management of the Strait of Hormuz into a new phase. This implies a shift in the rules of the game. The Strait of Hormuz is not merely a shipping route. It is a geopolitical pressure lever. In recent weeks, Iran has demonstrated through intermittent disruptions that it can create global economic costs by affecting this choke point. This sentence signals that such actions may only be the beginning. Then it says why these positions matter. Their importance lies in their alignment with developments on the ground. In recent days, there was an attack on an Iranian vessel and the detention of individuals on board, along with continued maritime pressure, that's the blockade, and they've been interpreted in Tehran as evidence that the ceasefire has effectively been violated. That's actually correct. As I've argued, it's not really a ceasefire, it's siege warfare. This explains Iran's reluctance to move forward with the second round of negotiations. In the same atmosphere, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf stated bluntly, we do not accept negotiations under the shadow of threats. Notice that that is the bolded sentence. We always pay attention to what sentences they bold. He went even further. We are prepared to unveil new cards on the battlefield, a significant remark suggesting Iran is not merely waiting, but actively preparing. Behind the delay in negotiations, there is another layer to the story. In Tehran, there is a growing concern that the negotiations may be a trap. Analysts suggest the United States could potentially use the talks to test Iran's reactions or even prepare for a surprise move. As a result, as long as maritime pressure continues, sitting at the negotiating table is seen not as a diplomatic opportunity, but as a security risk. In summary, if all of this is condensed, Tehran's message is clear. The war is not over, costs must be paid, and the Strait of Hormuz is entering a new operational phase. In other words, we're not negotiating, and we're not going to negotiate under threats. 3 short sentences, but one large implication. Finally, a bolded sentence. Iran does not want to merely participate in negotiations. It wants to reshape the rules of the game itself. So this is all the tough talk. And very important, the bolded line, we do not accept negotiations under the shadow of threats. So what they're trying to do is they know that the Americans want them to come to the table and make a deal. They want to use the fact that the Americans are still being aggressive with the blockade, saying the Americans aren't really honoring the ceasefire, as a kind of political pressure, saying to the Americans, look, we are actually willing to negotiate, but you have to stop all this blockade stuff. We're not going to do it under the threat of this blockade. We will come to the negotiating table. And the reason they want to do that is not just because they want the blockade to end, which they do, of course. It's strangling them. But it's not just about getting some economic relief and opening things up. It's also about giving them time. They benefit when negotiations take time, when there isn't a concurrent escalation in their situation while the negotiations are happening. They want to be able to kick the can down the road and negotiate and drag things out and have another round of negotiations and have discussions about the next round of negotiations. That's what the Iranians always do. That's what they were doing before the 12-day war. And as things went on, they dug in on tougher and tougher positions. You might remember that. As those negotiations went forward, they got tougher. They were doing the same thing in the lead up to this war. That is what they do. They know that as negotiations go on a long time, Westerners want to make a deal more. That's what they've experienced with other Western politicians. Trump is driving them nuts because Trump is giving them deadlines, and he has this blockade that is switching the balance in terms of who has leverage when it comes to time. Is time on their side or is time on Trump's side? They do not benefit from the negotiations taking longer so long as there's a blockade. They want the blockade to end as a precondition for negotiations. That's the first point here. Now, let's take a look at these other stories. And the reason I lined them all up is because of how similar they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stories I'm going to show you, all from today, all within a few hours of each other, all saying the same thing in different ways. So this is very, very telling, okay? Iran will not negotiate under threat. We just saw that in this story. This story was earlier. We do not accept negotiations under threats. And then we have a headline, Iran will not negotiate under a threat. The Iranian ambassador to Pakistan stated in a message that Iran, as a nation with a great civilization, does not negotiate under threat or force, asserting that this is a principle the United States must understand. Okay, the ambassador, it's a truth universally acknowledged that a single country in possession of a large civilization will not negotiate under the threat and force. This is a substantial Islamic and theological principle. I wish the U.S. would have perceived ... Very strange. Iranian officials have announced that due to the continued naval blockade of Iran, which is considered a violation of the ceasefire, they currently have no plans to participate in the Islamabad negotiations. Okay, and then look at this one. Next story. And this is about an hour later. No Iranian delegation sent to Islamabad. Okay, and it talks about how no one's going. And in the middle, the issue of the naval blockade is a very fundamental obstacle in the negotiations. In addition to the issue of the naval blockade, there are other excessive demands from the American side in the exchanged messages that do not show a clear outlook for any upcoming negotiations. Therefore, the Iranian delegation believes that as long as America does not look at the issue realistically and approaches the negotiating table with the same miscalculations that led to its defeat on the military field, whatever, negotiations are merely a waste of time, and Iran will not accompany America in this process. And then, a couple hours later, if the enemy does not understand diplomacy, the language of field will change the equations. The chairman of the Parliament's National Security and Foreign Policy Commission has stated that the field, meaning war, and diplomacy are complementary, warning that if the enemy does not understand the language of diplomacy, the language of the field, backed by popular resistance, will change the equation. He says, as I noted in my interview with Al Jazeera, the Iranian nation chooses the path of dignity and progress in the face of maximum pressure levers and diplomatic traps, meaning the negotiations are a diplomatic trap. There's all this pressure. The field and diplomacy are complementary to one another. If the enemy does not understand the language of diplomacy, the language of the field, backed by popular resistance, will change the equations. In other words, we're not going to engage in diplomacy. And then, about 2 hours after that, member of Iran's National Security Committee, negotiations with the U.S. make no sense at this time. Another guy, okay? This guy, Hassan Kashkavi, a member of Iran's Parliament National Security Committee, stated that negotiations with the United States under the current circumstances are meaningless, asking, bolded, has the war ended that we're negotiating with the U.S.? Okay, and then he talks about how, what the Americans are doing is illegal. He further emphasized that recent U.S. actions reflect exactly the scenario that negotiators usually try to prevent. Look at that sentence. He emphasized that recent U.S. actions reflect exactly the scenario that negotiators usually try to prevent. What they're saying is we can't negotiate with the Americans the way they're behaving. They're not behaving like normal negotiators. They're not behaving like good faith negotiators. They're trying to get the Americans to change what they're doing, to drop the blockade and change the whole balance of the negotiations. He noted, even now, it's unclear whether negotiations make sense at all. Now, I'm pointing this out because of the repetition. Look at these headlines again. Okay, this one was all about how, what their red lines are. But then we have Iran will not negotiate under threat, which was a line in this piece as well. The only bolded sentence in the whole piece. We don't negotiate under threat. We don't negotiate under threat. And then we have no Iranian delegation sent. And then we have this guy talking about how we're not going to negotiate, we're going to fight. And then we have this one that is, it's unclear whether negotiations make sense at all. These are all within a few hours of each other. This is all this afternoon, okay? Every single story I'm showing you is this afternoon. Negotiations don't make sense because the war is ongoing. There's no guarantee the U.S. will refrain from attacking. And look at this end. Kashkavi also highlighted the historical precedent, saying if negotiations are to happen, the war must be over. Just as Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin met in Tehran during World War II. But the war is not over yet, and we have not reached that point. Meaning you got to stop fighting. You got to stop your siege and blockade with us if we're going to negotiate. And then one more. Another hour later, Baghai, the spokesman of the foreign ministry, no final decision yet on attending Pakistan talks. And he talks all about how it doesn't make any sense to negotiate. Ceasefire breaches, naval blockade. Okay? This is what is happening. And then another story that happened this afternoon. Pakistan, and this is also on WANA. Iran yet to decide on second round of talks. How many stories do we need in one afternoon telling me that the Iranians don't want to negotiate, and all saying the exact same thing? Like they're almost identical news items in slightly different words. So let me tell you what I think this all means. I think that there are, 5 specific goals of their messaging. Number one, the failure. Explaining their failure. Like they sent no delegation to the second round of talks. And probably the real reason is that in the last negotiations, remember there was like maybe a deal for a ceasefire, the Straits of Hormuz, and then you had the foreign minister saying the Straits of Hormuz are opened. Immediately the IRGC said, no, it isn't. And we know that there's a lot of internal fighting going on between the foreign minister and the president, Pezeshkian, on one hand, and the IRGC guys on the other hand. And there's a real question, and J.D. Vance said this after the negotiations, it was unclear whether the negotiators actually had the authority to come to any decision. So they don't want to look like they're in that they're in disarray. And we've seen some news items in Iranian state media over recent days insisting that everyone's getting along great and communication's never been better, which is obviously a tell. So rather than allowing themselves to look weak and in disarray, they're flooding the zone with articles insisting that they made a principled choice based on their dignity, right? Right. He talked about that ambassadors the ambassador to Pakistan, we're a great civilization. So we have dignity and we're not going to negotiate under threat. Number two, the second thing they're doing. So number one, they're trying to frame their disarray and inability to get their act together as principle. Number two, they're pinning the blame on America preemptively. Every article in this whole stack places responsibility for the breakdown on U.S. excessive demands, on the naval blockade, on bad faith. This is, of course, reputation management aimed at international audiences. They might be signaling to the global South, Muslim majority countries, or any Western constituencies that are skeptical of U.S. foreign policy. There's a lot of Americans like that. So if the ceasefire collapses and the war resumes, Iran wants the narrative to be that America messed up, that America caused it. So that's pretty clear. They also have they think that there's some deterrence here. Deterrence signaling is what they're trying. These are all things they're trying to do with this messaging. The three red lines, the language of the field, right? And we see this approach also notably in the other Iranian state media outlet, which is Tasnim, which is more aligned with the IRGC. And look at their top stories today. On the very same day where there's like half a dozen or more stories in WANA, one after the other. The whole stack is all about the negotiations and why America has to drop the blockade if they want us to come to the negotiating table. And look at the top stories in Tasnim, same day. Iran readies new surprises for possible restart of war. Evidence indicates that Iran has prepared new surprises for a possible restart of the U.S.-Israeli war of aggression. And then the next one, U.S. government media surrounded by illusions. While the U.S. government and its media outlets appear to be surrounded by illusions, there is no disagreement among the Iranian administration. Meaning we're all getting along great. We're getting ready to start the war. And then the third story, commander warns of Iran's decisive response to any hostile move. No mention of the negotiations. According to Tasnim, they're getting ready to dig in and fight. That's where they are, and escalate. And in Chinese state media, and we know that the Chinese are friendly with the Iranians, trying to save the Iranian regime without getting too involved. This is Iranian. This has only been reported. This threat from 2 days ago has only been reported in Chinese state media. Yemen's Houthis threaten closure of Bab el-Mandeb Strait. But in Chinese state media. Yemen's Houthi group warned on Saturday that the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait could be closed. Right? If Sana'a, that's the capital of Yemen, makes the decision to close Bab el-Mandeb, no force will be able to open it. They want to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait as another choke point. This is an escalation that the Iranians want. So in the escalation talk that you have as part of the messaging, as part of the three red lines piece, that first piece we read, and the language of the field piece, right, from that member of the parliament, whoever he was, that's communicating their threat, the Hormuz disruption, potentially a Bab el-Mandeb disruption, new cards on the battlefield, right? So so let me just sum up so far. So number one goal of their messaging is reframing their chaos and disarray as principled, not wanting to give in to the Americans' demand that they come to negotiate under fire. Number two, pinning the blame on America if everything falls apart, if there's no negotiations. Number three, deterrence by issuing some threats about escalation. Number four, and this is a big one, and I think in some ways it's the main one, managing their domestic audience. Of course, these are in English, you might be wondering, but the truth is they just translate straight from the Persian. A lot of the stuff is for the domestic audience. Iran fought a war it clearly lost on the battlefield, and the regime has to explain to its own population why it's now negotiating with an adversary that it demonized for decades, and they have to do it without appearing weak. So the "we refuse to negotiate under threat" framing lets the regime simultaneously avoid talks while maintaining the posture of defiant resistance. And that's critical for them internally, because that's the big threat to the regime. And this is going to be part of my punchline in this video. Stay tuned for a couple more minutes. And finally, I think the fifth thing that they're trying to accomplish here is they're trying to create uncertainty to slow down the U.S. decision-making. This is big. Donald Trump is driving them nuts because of how fast he moves. He gives an ultimatum and it's just like 48 hours or a couple days, or, you know, a short ceasefire, 2 weeks, negotiate, come to the table. If you don't come to the table, boom. Open the Straits of Hormuz. Oh, you didn't open them? Boom, blockade. Trump is moving fast and it drives them crazy. It completely counteracts their usual strategy. Westerners are usually so easy for them to deal with. They just drag things out, and they have another summit meeting and another negotiation in a different European city. And the American diplomats love that, getting on planes and being negotiators. And that's what we've always seen in previous administrations. And the speed at which Trump is doing things is not to their liking. So they're trying to slow down U.S. decision-making by creating uncertainty and issuing conditions under which they'll negotiate, in the hopes that the Americans might say, well, okay, you know, we do want a deal, and if we can get them to the table, if we do X, Y, and Z, that's what they're hoping for. Okay? So that's what I think is happening. That's what I think that they are doing. And it all comes back to what I was saying from the beginning of the war, from before the war. Because what I've been saying all along, since before the war started, if you've been watching this channel, you heard me say it so many times. The regime's number one fear, their only real fear, what they're ultimately concerned with is, will they be in power when Trump is finished with whatever he's doing? Because even if they're badly battered, even if the people and the infrastructure is destroyed, they know that the Chinese money will be there. Maybe the Russian money will be there. They know that even if it takes a long time, even if it takes a decade or 2 decades, they will rebuild, they will suppress their people, and they will remain in power. They want to survive. They want to remain in power. It's number one for them. Everything is geared towards that singular goal. They don't care how much damage. I mean, they care, but that's not primary for them. Primary for them is survival. And the number one threat to the regime is not American and Israeli military action. The number one threat to the regime is the Iranian people. Because no matter what the United States does, no matter how much damage is caused from the air by the US and Israel, no matter how much economic devastation is brought on them, if they still are in charge, if on the ground they still have their thugs and they can still suppress the protesters, and they still have the weapons internally in Iran, and they can still be the regime, even if weak, then they won. We also have to remember, we're talking about 12 Shiite Muslims who believe that the adversity they undergo and the defeats that they undergo are all part of, that it's all part of, obstacles put in their way, and they need to persevere. This all goes back to the origin story of Shiite Islam. So they're not deterred by all of the destruction. They're not deterred the way we would think they'd be. Trump keeps waiting for them to cry uncle, because, come on, how much damage can you handle? The answer is a lot, a lot. And if they have to choose, they're still at the point. They won't necessarily always be at this point, but so far they're still there. They're still at the point where they believe that giving into American demands and projecting weakness and submission to American demands, if they project that to their people, that's a greater threat to the regime. That's a greater threat to the regime than the American attacks themselves. And therefore, I don't believe that they are going to come to the negotiating table. That is where I stand on this. I could turn out to be wrong tomorrow. And if I'm wrong and they come to the negotiating table, it'll be very interesting. And I'll have to reevaluate, and I will admit that I'm wrong. But so far, everything points in this direction. They are not going to go to the negotiating table. We just saw, I think, half a dozen articles saying it. Unless the U.S. would drop its blockade. If the U.S. blinks, if the U.S. gives in and eases up the restrictions and Trump says, you know what, let's do it. Okay, let's end the blockade just to get them into the room. He might do that. If he does that, I think it'll be a mistake. But, you know, I've been waiting for him to make mistakes throughout this, and he's been pretty good. So we'll see. We'll see which way it goes. Please make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Make sure you're subscribed to Israel 365 News. You don't want to miss any of that content. And make sure that you click on the link in the description of this video to subscribe to the Israel 365 News and Israel 365 Action newsletters so you can stay informed and stay in touch with everything that we're doing. God bless.